Welcome to the Brain Warriors Way podcast. I'm Dr. Daniel Amen.
And I'm Tana Amen. Here we teach you how to win the fight for your brain to defeat anxiety, depression, memory loss, ADHD, and addictions.
The Brain Warriors Way podcast is brought to you by Amen Clinics, where we've transformed lives for 3 decades using brain SPECT imaging to better target treatment and natural ways to heal the brain. For more information, visit amenclinics.com.
The Brain Warriors Way podcast is also brought to you by BrainMD, where we produce the highest quality nutraceutical products to support the health of your brain and body. For more information, visit brainmdhealth.com. Welcome to the Brain Warriors Way podcast. So welcome back to the Brain Warriors Way podcast and live chat. I'm here. I actually have the pleasure of having my daughter Chloe here today.
Hi.
So Daniel is not with us again. He is still finishing his book. I had something really special I wanted to talk to Chloe about. I walked in a couple weeks ago and saw her reading a book that sort of blew my mind because I read it in my 40s and you read it when you're 14. It was Brené Brown's book, Daring Greatly. And if you have not read that book, you should read it. And well, I shouldn't say should. You might want to check it out. And if you have read it, you know why I thought it was so amazing that my 14-year-old was reading it. Because being vulnerable, it's about vulnerability, the power of vulnerability. And that is not something I was ever good at. It's really powerful. So before we start, I want to actually read what the dictionary says about vulnerability. The dictionary defines vulnerability as this: capable of or susceptible to being wounded or hurt as by a weapon, open to moral attack, criticism, temptation, open to assault, difficult to defend. Well, no wonder we don't want to be vulnerable, right? So, and physically, when I think about being vulnerable, I have this thing about safety and security, right? Like the NSA's got nothing on me. I've got cameras and security system. I've got 2 different types of camera systems in case one goes down. And I mean, I'm like not joking.
Throwing that out there.
Yeah. So I don't like the idea of feeling unsafe.
Right.
And so we've attached this idea of being unsafe to being vulnerable.
Right.
And then we wonder why we're so afraid to show ourselves or our underbelly, right?
Yeah. So one of the reasons that I was kind of inspired to read Daring Greatly was because, especially with my age and the career that I want to go into, being vulnerable is a key part of it. It's just a big part of it. We see stars on TV, we see them on social media now, and we're like, gosh, they're so perfect. I wish I could be them. And what's not to love about their life? It's a lot harder than we think it is. Putting yourself out there, putting what you create out there is not easy, no matter who you are, whether you're a star or not. Doing anything is hard, and exposing yourself is really hard. So I was kind of inspired to read the book because that's part of myself that I wanted to benefit and I wanted to grow. And I thought that was really important. So
I love that.
I enjoyed her book a lot.
It's really a great book.
It's a really great book.
One thing I love is her definition. What she says about vulnerability is, let's see. Brené says that vulnerability is the birthplace of love, belonging, joy, courage, empathy, and creativity. It's the source of hope, empathy, accountability, and authenticity. And I know authenticity is one of your primary values.
So authenticity is definitely one of my top values. And that's why I wanted to improve on being vulnerable, because I think it's really important to be able to show who you are fully if you're going to be authentic.
So what's the worst thing that can happen if someone knows you and they know some of the things about you that you're afraid to show and they laugh or they criticize you? What's the worst thing that can happen?
They laugh and they criticize you. They don't like you. They disapprove of you. But that's one person. That's letting one person dictate what you do is one of the issues with vulnerability, because we're so scared of what people think and what they're going to think. But it's you ultimately decide what you do and where you go. And I think that letting people dictate what you do and disapprove of you is only holds you back. And that's something that I think is really important and that I want to learn how to do better, how to not let people dictate what I do because I'm afraid of them disapproving.
We see this, like you pointed out, with
Right.
stars all the time. So, and I think a perfect example are child stars. So we see, I mean, they're so afraid of being judged, and so they act like punks because they don't want people to see what's really going on with them, and they're not mature yet. I mean, that's part of it. Brains aren't developed. But I think a great example was Justin Bieber. He, you know, for a while, he was acting like this one way and like never really showed people who he was.
Right.
But as he changed and matured, and he began to show people this like underbelly, the soft side of who he was, and he began to go, yep, I'm not perfect. This is who I am. I'm just not perfect, but I'm really trying to be better. And all of a sudden, people started to go, wait, what? Wait, hold on.
Right.
I can't be mad at him if he's really working on being a better person.
Right.
And it's a scary thing to do.
Right. So I think an interesting pattern with people like that is when you show who you are and you're open to being vulnerable, no matter how terrifying it is, once you do it, people can still go, I disapprove of you. I don't like what you stand for. I don't like what you're doing. But it's really hard to not respect somebody who's willing to put themselves out there. It's just a matter of respect. Whether you like what they do or not, it's like that's hard to do. And everybody knows it. Everybody knows it's a hard thing to do.
Oh, yeah. No, you're right.
And you owe them respect.
There are many people whose values I don't agree with.
Right.
But if they hold themselves with dignity and they stand for what they believe in, if they're doing it in a dignified way, it's like, all right, I don't agree with you. But I can understand you and I can respect your right to say it and your right to believe that.
Right.
And so, but versus someone who sort of does it in an underhanded way
or
is hiding, right, or is not really authentic about it. That's very different. Then it's much easier to go, that's not, I'm not buying it, right? So it's much easier to do that and to criticize it if you know they're not being authentic. So if they say one thing and do another thing, it's much easier. So I actually like that. So how is it that you, at 14, because 14 I think is an age where teenagers are terrified of peer pressure and being criticized. How is it that you are not so afraid of that? How did you become more able, like what are some things you do?
Right.
To ground yourself?
Okay. So I'm still actually working on it now. In this moment, it's still not an easy thing to do. It takes a while. And like anything, like sports, anything, it takes practice. It takes continuing to do it and put yourself out there to grow. And then eventually it just becomes easy. So a couple of things that I do. One thing that I kind of taught myself that caught on for me, I think it's different for everyone because some things work for other people and other things don't. But one thing that I kind of figured out for myself is instead of telling myself to be vulnerable, because automatically I've noticed that when I tell myself to be vulnerable, I'm like, no, that's a bad idea. Don't do that. Like that's scary. Don't do that, right?
Scary.
So instead of doing that, if I'm in a situation where it's like, I need to show who I am right now, I need to be who I am, and I need to stand for what I believe in, instead of telling myself be vulnerable, I tell myself to be bold. Because automatically in my brain, I associate bold with being brave, with being strong, with being somebody who's tall, metaphorically, right? And I'm not.
She's not tall.
I'm not tall physically. So all I have is being tall metaphorically.
That's really cute.
So I tell myself to be bold instead of being vulnerable, because it's all about what you associate it with. I associate being vulnerable with that's scary, I don't want to do it. But being bold is, wow, she's cool, she's strong, right? She knows what she wants. So I tell myself be bold when I'm in situations where I need to be vulnerable.
I actually like that. So my word is be a warrior, because I grew up feeling terrified. Like there's a white tiger around every corner. I grew up in chaos. And warriors are people who get stuff done, right? Warriors are people who, and like even like thinking about it now almost makes me want to cry, because I felt so the opposite of that growing up. I was always scared. Well, warriors, maybe they're scared, but they have answers, they have solutions, they have skills, they have like, they get it done. So I'm like, I'm going to identify with a warrior. And so that's why I practice martial arts. And I remember one time being on stage actually when I read her book, was because I was on stage speaking, and I have a tendency to have a pretty strong presence, and I like that. I've worked really hard on building walls, on having a strong presence.
Right.
But it crumbled, and I wasn't expecting it. I was on stage one time, and I'm in front of like a couple thousand doctors. And I was invited to speak to a couple thousand doctors, which doesn't usually happen anyways. Like, it was a rare, like, sort of gift that it happened. And I'm speaking, and something happened, and I started to cry on stage. I was telling my story, and I started to shake and cry, and all of a sudden I felt really small. I felt like the little girl that was scared and terrified. And I'm like, what is happening to me? I'm not like this. I'm a warrior. Like, what's happening to me? I don't know what's happening right now. And I wanted to run off stage, and I didn't know what to do. And I just stood there shaking like a little girl. I felt like a little girl, but I just fought through it, and I told the story shaking. And it's actually still on YouTube. But anyways, at the end of it, they started applauding. And then when it was over, I had a heart surgeon run up to me. He goes, "No one makes me cry. You made me cry." And I was like, I wasn't quite sure to take it. But I realized something. It was the power of being authentic, of letting your wall down.
Right.
And then someone recommended that book to me.
I think we rely so much on these walls that we build up, but they're temporary. Because what happens when you don't have those walls anymore? What do? You know what I mean? Do you let it like defeat you, or do you do something about it? And so yeah, I have 4 things that I do to practice vulnerability that make it a little bit easier for me. So the first thing is to tell myself to be bold. The second thing is to talk about it. So I have people in my life that I talk about things with that I wouldn't necessarily want to talk to other people about because it's scary, or it's like it feels too vulnerable. So I talk to, one of them is you.
I'm so lucky.
So yeah, because I think that talking about it, one thing that I learned from the book actually is the less you talk about vulnerability, the more you have. Mm-hmm. So the more shame you have, the more shame you have, the less
when you shine a light in the dark.
Right, the less you talk about it, the more you have.
I love that.
So that's the other thing. And then the third thing is gratitude. I think that, well, at least for me, when I'm grateful and I have gratitude, it masks shame. It masks vulnerability. When I'm grateful for what I do have, what I am good at, what I know I'm capable of doing, it makes what I feel like I can't do in the moment, or what I'm afraid to do, a lot smaller.
That's really good.
So, right. So what I know that I'm good at, and what I know that I have, so not only in myself, but in other people. So I know I have my family to fall back on. If this doesn't go well, I have my family still. If this doesn't go well, I still have my friends. It's okay. If this doesn't go well, I've still accomplished this, and this, and it's okay.
So you learn something.
Right. So having gratitude kind of reminds me that, look, you have something to fall back on. You don't, you know what I'm saying?
So in other words, it's not like the end all. Yes, it's not the end all. Yeah.
Right. So I think that was the third one, right? Yeah. Right? That was the third one. So the fourth one is opportunity. I like to see vulnerability as an opportunity rather than seeing it as like this big, scary failure or an opportunity to fail. I see it as an opportunity to accomplish something. So when you're vulnerable, you have the opportunity to achieve something, right? Because when you're vulnerable, it's like you have the opportunity to play in a big sports game, or you have the opportunity to perform, you have the opportunity to write a book, you have the opportunity, and that's vulnerable. But it can be a big success still. It can still be a big accomplishment, right? So that's how I kind of like to see it. It's all about like mindset, I guess. But
do you see why she amazes me? You're pretty awesome. So I read the book in my 40s, and I'm like, wow, if someone like the fact that you are getting such a head start on some of this amazing information and some of these really important life skills and concepts is just, it's fascinating to me, and it's going to save you. There's nothing that can save us from pain in life, but there are things you can do to just guide you through the pain.
Right.
And help you grow instead of shrinking when you have pain in life.
Right.
And help you pass it on and help other people. I'm so
Yeah.
proud of you. You're so awesome. I love you. So we'll be back with the Chloe Show. I thought that was pretty amazing. So thank you so much. So welcome back. I am here again with Chloe, my daughter, that I'm so proud of. We are talking about vulnerability, and you read Brene Brown's book, Daring Greatly.
Yep.
And I was so impressed because I read it, like I said, in my 40s, and you read it at 14, and you're going to get just so much benefit by reading some of these books and learning this stuff, at an age where, I'm always so impressed at how much you're always trying to better yourself.
Right.
And that's a really important thing.
Yeah.
So we talked in the last segment about some of the things you do to ground yourself, how you might be able to help teens, utilize some of those skills. One of the things I want to talk about in this segment is helping parents.
Yeah.
And also, so you talking to parents about how they might be able to help kids, and me talking to parents, but also, talking to kids. Also, what's the opposite? What happens if you decide you don't want to utilize some of these skills? I like what she says. We want to be thinking about abundance, about versus scarcity. Okay, so if we have a scarcity mindset and we're terrified of being vulnerable because we're focused on scarcity, she identifies these three components: shame, comparison, disengagement, sort of the opposite of what we're trying to do with being vulnerable and opening ourselves up. Mm-hmm. So, shame is a big one. It's why people don't want to be vulnerable, right? You talked about that in the last one, in our last segment. Yeah. So you mentioned that. Talk a little bit about comparison.
Okay, so especially
for teenagers,
people my age, I was gonna say. So especially people my age, comparison is a big thing that kind of dictates what we do and the decisions we make, because we're so worried about, but this person does this better than I do. Or what if I don't do it as good as this person? Or their hair
is prettier, or they're skinnier, or, it goes on and on with teens.
Everything. Right. And I think that how we kind of gauge what we're comfortable with doing is based on what other people are comfortable with doing. So if that person's comfortable with doing it, then maybe I should be too. But what if you started it? What if you were the one to set that tone? And what if you were the one to do it first? That's being vulnerable. What if you were the one to do it first and other people were to go, oh, okay, she did it. But instead, I think we kind of compare ourselves with other people and see how it turns out for other people before we decide to do it.
Right.
So I think that's kind of what goes along with comparison.
Have you read Roosevelt's speech, Man in the Arena, yet?
I think I've read part of it.
Oh, you should read that one.
I think it was actually in the book.
It's one of my very favorite speeches or quotes, because I always told Daniel when I met him. So like I said, I started working on my personal growth, early on in life, but I don't think I really had my major breakthroughs until I was in my late 30s.
Right.
So you're way ahead of me. So it was hard for me. I mean, there were a lot of things that were hard for me based on the way I grew up and not having the same access to things and support and whatever. But I was working on it.
Right.
And so, but I told Daniel when I met him, I never, ever, ever would marry someone who was well known. I would never, ever marry someone who was a public figure or famous or on TV, God forbid. And he was like, why? I'm like, because I want anonymity. It took me forever to build my privacy and walls and anonymity. And I would never do that. I would never want to be like in the public eye.
Careful
what you wish for. Yes. And then not only did he do that, but then he wanted to drag me with him. So I actually love what I do now, but I had to really learn how to do that. And that speech, Man in the Arena, just so well sums up. It's people who are in the arena, who are taking chances, who are making a difference that, so what if you're being criticized? The people on the sidelines, so what if they're making criticisms? They're not doing anything.
They're not doing it.
Right? So those are not the people I actually want. Like, I get criticized all the time. All I got to do is read my Facebook page. I get criticized all the time. There was a time that would have been crippling to me. Now I'm like, well, if I'm not getting those criticisms, I'm not making a difference. Like I'm not, it means I'm not busy enough.
Right.
Because if that means I'm actually doing something if people are criticizing me. So I actually use that as almost an opposite gauge. Does that make sense?
Right.
So I like that. And the other one I want to talk about with you for teens is disengagement, because social media is a big thing. Right. Not only are teens using social media to compare themselves, but you mentioned something to me that was really important. You said that kids have to do more and more and more now to be noticed. To be noticed. Because of social media.
It gets more and more extreme as social media continues and grows bigger. In order to be noticed or get, I guess you would say, validation, you have to go to extremes.
So these nude pictures.
Right. You have to do all these crazy things and put it out there on social media in order to be noticed.
Right. So in their attempt to engage and be noticed, they're actually almost disengaging in the real world.
In the real world. Mm-hmm.
So their social skills are less. They're not present with people and places.
Right.
We go to, Disneyland even. Every teenager I see is like this. They don't even know, like, what? They're not even enjoying Disneyland.
Right.
Because they're so busy trying to, be on social media. It's crazy. So it's a really important thing. And, that, I don't know, our society, we need to start working on that. So as a parent, I've always, because I've done so much work on myself, of course, I want to be able to pass that on to you. We never know if we're actually doing the right thing, right? I always say that a joke at some point, I'm probably going to have to pay for your therapy. And that's okay, because we never know. You don't come with a manual, right?
Right.
But we're trying to do the right things. And people who listen to this podcast are trying to do the right things.
Right.
So we don't often get the truth from our kids.
No.
I feel like I get the truth a lot from you. Sometimes I'm like, ouch, I'm not sure I wanted to hear that, but it's good. So what are some things that parents could do or could do better to help their kids open up and be more authentic and be more vulnerable? Or what are some things that parents do that cause their kids to sort of shut down?
So one thing I think that's really important, parents sometimes expect their kids to open up to them, be honest, be more vulnerable. But at that same time, they're not willing to do it. They're not willing to be vulnerable. They're not willing to open up to their kids. So why should their kids open up to them if they're not willing to open up,
I've told you
to
some
their
pretty
kids?
Shocking things, actually, I think.
Yeah, I would say so. But, so if you're not willing to open up to your kids and be vulnerable with your kids, why should they do the same with you? I think one place, especially when you're a teenager, that's really important is kind of trying to think like them. They're worried about being approved of, about getting validation, and that's why they look at other teens their age to see who've done it first, or if it worked for them, or doing certain things to be popular, doing certain things to, get certain things. So I think that as a parent, you have to kind of just look at it like in their kind of perspective and go, they're just afraid. They're just afraid to do it because they're afraid of the outcome. You know what I'm saying? So you have to kind of just see it from their perspective instead of getting upset with them. It's, yeah, so.
I try really hard to remember what it was like being a teenager, and quite frankly, I remember it sucking, kind of. So, yeah, I remember that. But I do try to tell you things, and I've always tried to make it sort of age appropriate at the time, but a little shocking almost, so that you would know.
Right.
You look at me like that. Because, and I've done that intentionally, because I wanted you to know that, number one, I wasn't perfect. Number two, that it's okay for you to do the same. That, like, I tell you stuff that's a little bit, like, just a little edgy for your age, because, like, you know, when she's young, that might be like whatever. So it's always age appropriate, but just enough so that she knows, oh, my mom knows what's going on, and it's okay for me to talk to her.
Right.
So I never wanted to make it sound like, oh, I didn't do that. I was such a good girl, because that is not going to help you to open up to me.
What we want is somebody we can relate to.
Right.
And in order to be able to relate to somebody, if you want somebody to relate to you, you have to think like them. You have to, you know, be relatable in their sense, you know?
So we would always joke around about it. And so I think I've heard some of your friends talking, and they're like, I would often say, well, why don't you talk to your mom about that? Oh my God, I can't do that. Like, and it's like, why? So why do you think that they say that?
I think that they're afraid, just like anyone else, or afraid of opening up to anybody else, like their peers, because they're going to be, it's going to be a disapproval. It's going to be, you're a lesser person because of it. And I think, not outwardly saying it, but I think that sometimes parents do that. I think that sometimes parents, without really knowing it and without maybe not really meaning it, they kind of go, oh, that's bad. Like, you know, and kids think of that and associate that with, I'm not as good. I'm not as good because my parents disapproved of me. Being a parent, it's kind of like we look up to our parents because they're our role models, right? Growing up, it's like, my parent does this, my parent does that, and every kid wants to follow in their parents' footsteps. But it's hard. It's really hard, just like it is with your friends, when you feel like your parents don't approve of you.
Right.
So if they feel like they can relate to them, it makes it a lot easier instead of putting the shame on them, which makes them not want to open up at all. So is there anything else you would add to that? Is there anything that has made it easier for you to open up? I know one story, and you might not even remember this, and I don't know if it helped or not. Maybe you can say it helped or it didn't help. So Chloe is a perfectionist, has been by nature since she was little. Mm-hmm. Really hard on herself, and that did not come from me. We don't try to do that with her. We always encourage her effort, not her grades, not the outcome. We always encourage the effort. It's the hard work. Right. It's the work ethic that we encourage. It's never the grade or the whatever, the result. So you studied really hard for a test one time. And it was like, I think like 4th grade. Anyways, she got in the car and she was crying and she was so upset because she didn't get a good grade on the test. But she studied really hard. And so I'm like, oh, I'm sorry, sweetheart. I'm sorry that you didn't get the grade you were expecting. And so anyways, when you told me the grade, I'm like, okay, so high five. And you were like mad at me. At first, you're like, what? I'm like, give me a high five. And you got really upset. And I'm like, come on, we're going to go for ice cream. And you looked at me, you go, now I know something's wrong with you. Number one, ice cream? You're like, ice cream? You? Ice cream? So, but I took her out for ice cream, and it was an intentional move. Right. It was to emphasize a couple of things. Number one, it's the effort. It's not the outcome. That perfectionism is never going to be the thing that's going to help you out in life. But I also never wanted you to be afraid to, you know, be able to come and share with me when you're upset about something. It's like, that's not the goal. The goal was to have you put the effort in. Right. Because the effort's always going to pay off. The grade, so what? That eventually will happen. If you keep putting the effort in, eventually you're going to do, you know, it'll catch up. So I think when parents get so focused on the details, it can really damage that relationship. Right. We can't always control the outcome of what happens, but it's what you do to get there that's important. If you follow the right steps to get there and the outcome doesn't turn out the way you wanted it to, that's not something we can control. But we can control how we get there. We can control what we do to make it happen.
Right.
Whether it turns out the way we want it to or not. And so another thing that I kind of tell myself is not to, because I'm a perfectionist, is to not let my vulnerabilities and what I think I need work on or what I think I need to be better at define me.
I like that.
Define who I am. Because it's like, if you let every little detail that you're like, I can make that better. Or
I'll wait until it's better.
I'll wait. Like, I'm not gonna do that until I know it's perfect.
So in other words, you don't take risks because you think you need to wait till you're better.
Right.
Ah.
But I also think that when we put ourselves out there, if there's one thing that maybe someone picks out or that you yourself pick out that you don't really like, we let that one thing define who we are. Like, I'm not as good because of that thing. But I think it's really important to know that you can decide what defines you. You can't let, everyone else decide that for you, or your own like little thing about yourself that you think you want to change. And I think we can still want to change certain things. We can still want to improve. That's why I read books like Daring Greatly. We can still want to improve things about ourselves and still own who we are and what we stand for while doing it, and not let that make us, less of who we are. So
I love that. Well, we would highly recommend the book Daring Greatly. And I'm so happy that you joined me today.
Me too.
I think this is really helpful for teens to hear and to help them find their center and their balance, and not necessarily look to other teens for approval, but rather to find their own grounding and be authentic. So thanks, sweetie.
Thank you for listening to the Brain Warriors Way podcast. Go to iTunes and leave a review, and you'll automatically be entered into a drawing to get a free signed copy of the Brain Warriors Way and the Brain Warriors Way cookbook we give away every month.